As a former employee of Nigel Farage, I'm happy to announce that today I am talking to the Nigel Farage of the Western Cape. Hello, Phil.
Hi, Byron. How are you?
Not too bad. So, obviously, the last time we discussed, you were talking to us about the Cape Exit Party. Obviously, at that point in time, we did have a little bit of an exchange on it, and it was theoretical, but it's no longer theoretical because the party's actually been formed now, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. The Referendum Party is now in existence, and we launched last week, so now the hard work begins in earnest.
Yeah, I mean, only mad people start a political party in like October or November of the year. I just want to go on holiday, Phil. What you doing starting up political parties?
But I think only mad people start political parties, and if it happens to be in October or November, you're no less mad. So I agree. It's fair to say it's not something for the faint-hearted.
No, it's not. So referendum party, that's what it's called. What do you want? Tell the people.
Well, we want a referendum, of course. We want a referendum on Cape independence. We've tried everything else. We've tried to reason with our friends at the DA. We've tried to put political pressure on them. We even got as far as getting promised a referendum. And obviously, when they broke that promise, then here we are now. So we recognise the DA do a great job of governing the Western Cape. We don't want to remove them from power, but we do want to force them to listen to the 7 out of 10 Western Cape voters who want a referendum on Cape independence and give some meaning to the word democratic, which is in their name Democratic Alliance, and actually ask the people of the Western Cape what it is that they want. So in a nutshell, we want to force the DA government to call a referendum on Cape independence so we can create a first world country at this little bottom tip of Africa.
That sounds a lot like colonialism to me. So maybe if you could actually help me out here. What do you actually mean by the Western Cape? I'm assuming obviously you mean the current geography of the Western Cape. There's no disputed territory of the Eastern Cape or the Northern Cape that you would assume or assert that belongs to the Western Cape. So it's literally, if we take the geographical location right now known as the Western Cape and we draw a circle around it, that's what you want.
Well, that's where we want to start. It certainly isn't where we want to finish. The reality is, let's sort of take it back a step. What's the difference between the Western Cape and the rest of South Africa? Well, it's an ideological divide. The majority in the Western Cape have one particular ideology they want, which is why they habitually vote for the DA and reject the ANC. And the rest of South Africa habitually elects the ANC and rejects the DA because they have a different ideology. Now, the easiest starting point of creating that divide is the Western Cape, because in the Western Cape, you've got 30 years of evidence to say, well, we clearly want something different. Never once have the majority of the Western Cape voted for the ANC. And if we look at international law, what are the criteria for starting a country, or for the criteria for a country? There's 4 of them. They're established in the Montevideo Convention, and they are a permanent population, Western Cape, tick, a defined territory, tick, a government, tick, and then actually the 4th one is a bit of a bizarre one, and it's almost after the fact, which is the ability to enter into foreign relations with other countries. And we shouldn't have that, but Alan Winde did actually take it upon himself. So ironically, we even have the 4th, which is an optional one. So therefore, it's very easy to make that argument. You can't make that argument in the Northern Cape or the Eastern Cape because they habitually vote ANC. Now, if you look at a voting map of South Africa, you'll see that the ideological divide isn't exactly along the borders of the Western Cape. It goes about halfway or 2/3 of the way through the Northern Cape, and it goes into about the first quarter of the Eastern Cape. So actually, we think the final border of an independent Western Cape would be bigger than the Western Cape. But it's easier to start, to hold the referendum in the Western Cape where it's nice and clean, secure a win for the referendum. So now we have independence for the Western Cape en route. Now the negotiations start with the national government. And what we'd actually love to see afterwards then is a series of mini referendums along the border at provincial levels. So people then can say, okay, well, look, there's going to be this new country. Are we going to, which side of the border are we going to fall? So that border eventually is defined democratically by the people. And I think we'd envisage then a reasonable portion of the Northern Cape and a small portion of the Eastern Cape falling within the final border, but that should be defined by some democratic process that's fair and reasonable.
Have you ever thought about maybe just shooting rocket from the Western Cape into South Africa? And then when South Africa retaliates, you say, we want independence. That works for other territories. Should you give it a shot as a political policy of the referendum party?
No, definitely not something we've considered. We are fairly committed to a peaceful and democratic process.
But think about it. Like if a rocket hits Bloemfontein, I mean, will anyone actually know?
Well, I guess I'm not even going to go there.
Well, if a rocket hits KZN, I think people will think it's an improvement.
Exactly. So, Phil, I mean, you and I, we've been down. I think we've spoken. I don't know. I think you're the most. You are the guest that has been on the show the most, 5 or 6 times, I believe, in the past 3.5 years. So we've been together since the beginning. I think your first interview was on Morning Shot when you first came out with the CAIG at the time. You've done all the polling, but there's a world of difference, Phil, between people saying they want independence and saying they want a referendum, and those that will actually go and do it.
Absolutely.
Right? Everyone can say, oh, I support Israel or Palestine, but no one's actually going to go there and fight for what they believe in essence. How do you solve this problem? Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, that is the question, isn't it? Why is it the Cape Exit have got 850,000 people have signed up saying I want Cape Independence, and the Cape Independence Party's got 8,000 votes? What happened to the other 842,000 people? Exactly. And of course, that is the question. How do you convince people? And in many ways, but it's a sensible question, because actually it goes to the heart of why there is a referendum party. Because what is that? And one of the interesting things we did is last week we ran for the first time focus groups, and we had our messaging tied up and we wanted to run. It was fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating.
That's what the DA does, Phil.
Yeah,
don't copy them.
We're a political party now. We have to do these things. So we wanted to sort of test a lot of our messages, because exactly that issue. Because let's crack back to say, what's the issue? Why isn't that those 850,000 don't vote for Cape Independence? And the reality is that for most people, it's a nice idea. They're not entirely convinced it's going to happen. It's an abstract concept in the future. Whereas when they go to the polls, it's kind of like, oh, hang on a second, I'm voting for tomorrow. Who's going to be governed? Who's going to make sure? And particularly the DA are past masters at sort of having this ANC khafar. If you don't vote for us, the ANC is going to come over there, and actually it'll all go to pot. I could use a ruder word. So and the DA are fantastic at doing that, and so therefore what you have is people having to balance off the realities of the present, and clearly for most people they think in the Western Cape, and I think probably reasonably so, that the DA have done a good job on balance. They're better than the rest of it, and therefore they want a DA government. And therefore, if you have to then ask them to instead vote for this abstract concept, which is in the future, it's quite hard to get them to do it, particularly if they feel that's risking their present, which is the whole point of putting up the referendum party, to say, look, hang on a second, we will vote with the DA. The first thing we make as the referendum party is a promise that if you vote for us, we will vote with the DA to allow them to form a Western Cape government. And that's not because we're necessarily lifelong supporters of the DA. It's because we recognise that we know from polling 7 out of 10 Cape Independence supporters want a DA government. And actually, that's the biggest objection that stops people voting for Cape Independence. So the whole point is to say, right, fine, you can have a DA government. We'll make sure that you don't have to worry about losing over. There won't be an ANC coming back. There will be a DA government in the Western Cape. But we will also then hold them to account on the referendum on Cape Independence. So we're dealing with that objection. And one of the really interesting things in these focus groups, which we suspected, but it was so nice to see. First of all, the DA is a cult. I think Martin van Staden said, what is it with the DA? It's a cult. DA voters can't even entertain the idea that you can criticize the DA on a particular issue and still remain loyal to the DA. And the more I sort of delve into this, the more that's clearly the case. And our polling groups or our focus groups are much the same. People were absolutely devoted to the DA. They recognised the DA had done a really good job in the Western Cape. It was better than the rest of South Africa. They liked the fact they repeatedly would say, a pipe burst, somebody comes and fixes it. If the streetlight breaks, somebody comes and fixes it. And that was across the sort of socio-economic divide. That was general. These people really, really committed. And and if you asked them at the outset, are you willing to vote against the DA? Everybody said no. At the end of the day, absolutely, it is a cult. Look, and by the way, in our polling groups, because we're targeting DA voters, we only had DA voters in our polling groups, although they didn't know that when they came off. But then we started to say to them, look, just put that aside now and imagine the future. Just let your imagination run wild and tell us, what should the Western Cape, in your dreams, what would the Western Cape look like in 10 years' time? And we asked them to imagine the future. They would then effectively describe a first world country. They wanted to be safe. They wanted the schools and the hospitals to work. They wanted the roads to be functional. They wanted unemployment lower. So they had all of these issues that they described this really functional country. Then we said in the focus groups, okay, if you keep on voting DA, do you think that future is going to materialise? And then the group I can't say to a man, but as an expression to a man, obviously it wasn't just men, then suddenly said, no, if we keep on voting for the DA, we're not, our president's fine, but that future isn't going to materialise. And then we said to them, well, what would have to happen for that material to materialise? In every single group, there was silence. And then suddenly somebody said, well, we'd have to become independent. The only way we can have that future is through Cape independence. And then what was really fascinating from a sociological point of view is if the next person jumped in and agreed with them, that then took over and the group moved forward and the group then decided Cape independence was the answer. If the next person that jumped in and said, oh no, that would be a terrible idea, the first person crawled back into their shell and Cape independence was off the agenda. That sort of social fact that everybody knows Cape independence is the solution, but actually they're just a bit scared to say it out loud. And obviously, that really affirmed our message. So if we look at what we're talking about at the referendum party, is we're kind of saying, look, there are two futures here. In 2024, you are going to be voting between two possible futures: a failed state or a first world country. And actually, most people recognise if they vote ANC, they're going to get a failed state. We've just got to help them to realise that if they vote DA, they're going to end up with a failed state just a little bit more slowly, because ultimately the ANC is in control of everything anyway from Pretoria. And people know that. We've got to get that in. And I don't know whether we can do that. I hope we do. But certainly that's our marketing strategy, to convince people that if they want the future that they really want, that they need to vote for Cape independence, and we know from the focus groups, they know it in their heart of hearts. Whether we can get them to go to the polls and vote for it remains to be seen.
Cool. I've got a couple of questions then for you. Let's say you get Cape independence. What are you doing for currency? You keeping the rand? Having a Cape dollar? Like what's the idea on fiscal policy?
Yeah, no, look, fair question. And to be honest, it isn't something that we've resolved at this point in time. I think there's other options. I think keeping the rand wouldn't really be an option. I think we'd almost certainly set up our own currency, but that's not going to be an easy feat. And obviously, we need to get the right experts in there. Whether there would be an interim period where, for example, we dollarized, or who knows? There are certainly people saying, look, actually, this is an opportunity to adopt digital currencies. I think that remains to be seen, and that's going to be it's outside of my wheelhouse. I'm not an expert. We need to bring the experts in and to find a solution that's going to
the most resilient currency, the Russian ruble. Highly recommended.
Okay, we'll put it on our list.
Excellent. Well, it's kind of true. It's kind of true. So the Russian ruble, obviously, as you know, right now is still retained as currency, even though it's the most heavily sanctioned currency on the planet.
That's very well.
But with that being
independent Western Cape, under a lot of pressure, but still somehow resilient.
So the interesting factor with the currency is obviously, as you may know, and we saw this in a case study in Europe. Obviously, when Europe went and they eurized, they all adopted the euro. Obviously, we had hyperinflation in terms of currencies and cost of living increases. So is that not a concern that you may get independence, but in the process of trying to go through the fiscal policy, that obviously means that you get a degree of price inflation. Obviously, bread starts becoming more expensive, property becomes more expensive, and the fiscal case starts to be eroded. I mean, obviously, this is one of the things that we've seen even with Scottish independence. A lot of people are arguing, or a lot of people argue that the case for Scottish independence basically was defeated on economic grounds or fiscal grounds. So I'm assuming, as it's a tried and tested path, we've already seen where this all goes. The first attack that you're going to get in terms of the Reform Party will be fiscal.
No, and as I say, I think a lot of these things have still got to be established. I think it's a fair question. In Africa, you've seen in Zimbabwe, we've seen in Angola, we've seen in other countries that actually once they dollarize, then you have this adjustment period, but ultimately, at the end of that, they come out the other side. And you've got to remember that our primary argument for Cape independence is not economic. Actually, the economic argument is extraordinarily strong. and show the Western Cape is subsidising the rest of South Africa. Gauteng and the Western Cape are the only two provinces that pay into the system, and that is before whilst the Western Cape has to exercise or implement the ANC's economic policies, which are disastrous. So once the Western Cape is free to exercise its own economic policies, I think it's going to become a real. Do we call it economic tiger, Africa, or do we call it economic lion? I don't know. But anyway, we're going to see it. But the primary driving force for Cape independence is ideological. It's about control of our own destiny. And of course, setting up a country is not going to be for sissies. I've certainly not done it. And we're going to have to fight through a whole number of issues. And setting up systems is going to be a massive task. But equally, we can look around the world and the new countries formed all the time. They've all managed it successfully. So I don't think there's any reason to think the Western Cape isn't going to negotiate that very, very successfully. We've got some very, very capable people. We already have our own stock exchange. We already have many things that are starting to sort of form in the Western Cape as it actually develops autonomy. It's been developing autonomy for a period of time now due to the dysfunction of South Africa. So a lot of those things are just going to continue and be formalised.
But perhaps, Phil, that is one of the strongest criticisms against what you are doing, right? Independence is happening de facto, not just for the Western Cape, but everywhere. Right? I'm independent from the grid. So is Byron. So is like most of my neighborhood. We're independent from the police. We are a true libertarian paradise here in South Africa, because the government is socialist and wildly incompetent. So won't Cape independence just arise naturally? Just let it happen. Why follow this political procedure when it will just happen anyway?
Paradise for who? South Africa's got an unemployment rate of 40%. The Western Cape's got an unemployment of 25%. It's certainly not paradise for those people. That people are living in abject poverty. It's paradise for the people who have the sort of the wherewithal to divorce themselves from the national government. But the vast majority of ordinary people don't have that capacity, and actually it's anything but paradise. And actually that's one of the arguments.
I've never used the word paradise. Sorry, I don't know what. All I'm saying is that the natural velocity of the state is balkanization anyway. So why have a political action through the referendum party when the inevitable conclusion of the balkanization will be independence anyway? That's the question.
Well, I think it's always been the case that de facto and de jure, the two different sort of forms of independence, sort of coexist, and actually, both parts are helpful. So the gradual, it's not gradual, let's not even use that word, the increasingly dysfunctionality of the South African state makes Cape independence more achievable. And actually, we're talking about the state, but what we haven't yet got to is that really ideologically. We've got to remember that South Africa is a country that lies to itself about ideas. It's full of people who are deeply, deeply racist. We're completely divided over some of these issues demographically, and actually we sort of cover it over. We've been covering it over for sort of 30 years. And these are issues that are going to emerge at some point in time. We've got this ideological divide now, those things are going to rear their ugly head at some point. They're already starting to rear their ugly head. South Africa is a country that is notionally non-racial, and I'm a really deeply non-racial. Non-racialism is a founding principle of the South African Constitution. We are not a non-racial country. We're actually one of the most racialized countries on earth. What is the dominant philosophy, the ideological philosophy of South Africa? It's African nationalism, and actually we've kind of got this conflict. So just letting this thing break up is not going to solve all of our issues. It's going to solve some of the issues, but actually we do need to sort of create some order in the process and drive this so that we end up with the type of country at the end that we want, and we don't end up really living in the Wild West, which is the alternative.
I don't mind the Wild West.
You've got lots of guns.
So that's actually a good point. So what's going to be the founding philosophy of the Western Cape? I mean, obviously, are you an advocate of the First Amendment, Second Amendment? Will you be pushing those ideas, or will you be pushing what I would describe as Australian liberal type ideas, where you're not wanting to enshrine freedom of speech and self-defense in your law? How would that work?
So So you absolutely despise me for this because I am the world's biggest pragmatist. There are very, very few issues that I have really strong ideological views. There are some, and ironically, non-racialism is one of them. But for the most part, what I want to do is secure a future for my family. And a good future, and for obviously people around me. But the top of my list is my family. That after that is the people I know's family, and my circle of influence goes out otherwise. So when we sit down and we're going to negotiate, so what's the process here? We're going to have a referendum. The Western Cape's going to vote to leave. Now there's going to be a set of negotiations between the Western Cape government and the South African government, and what form that takes. To be honest, first of all, the Western Cape people have to be part of that process, and what they want becomes important. And I trust in the democratic system, because if we look back for 30 years, the Western Cape people have made pretty good decisions, certainly far better decisions than the rest of South Africa. So we have to trust them to make good decisions. And in that process, well, it is a big statement to make, but I think the election results bear it out.
Well, explain Alan Winde then.
Well, okay, so
how do you explain the Western Cape perfect?
I think we said this last time. Alan Winde is a remarkable bureaucrat, and you can read that both sentences correctly. But I mean, the Western Cape is clearly well run in comparison to the rest of South Africa. Let's be honest.
I mean, the only thing that I can say, assuming the Western Cape becomes independent, just make Jordan Hill-Lewis dictator for life. The guy's young, he's 35, he's been running Cape Town quite well for 3 years. He's got balls because he destroyed the taxi bosses. Just make him dictator for life. And I think
but I'm going to push you on this. You didn't actually answer my question.
Much better. What question?
Are they pushing for their own constitutional amendments to have first and second amendments rights? And it was very nicely
Nigel
avoided.
Farage. This is Nigel Farage, not the people. He just wants Brexit. Whatever happens after Brexit doesn't matter. Is that right, Phil?
Well, look, I think that doesn't matter is wrong, but actually, we're not an ideological movement. We're a single issue party.
Hang on, you said the reason for Brexit for Cape exit is ideological, because there's an ideological drive between the rest of the Western Cape and the rest of South Africa. So then I'm asking you, from an ideological perspective, what is the actual position? If you get your independence tomorrow, are you having constitutional amendments or First Amendments and Second Amendment rights? Or are you taking Australian-type positions on this, whereby you shut everybody up and everybody loses their guns? Because you've said it. You've said there's an ideological divide. So what is the ideology?
The ideological divide is not around gun ownership, is it? Let's be honest. The ideological divide is around: do we want a broadly socialist country or a more market-orientated country? Do we want a country that's African nationalistic, or do we want a country that's genuinely non-racial? They are the big questions here, and they're the ones that are really important to me. So, for example, this may have people in horror, but I could be convinced on gun ownership either way. For me personally, I'm pretty agnostic on gun ownership. But actually, there'll be people, I'm sure, who have very, very strong views, and if we have a good process, then we'll arrive at a constitution that reflects the democratic will of the Western Cape people. What do I want that are non-negotiables for me? I want to have a genuinely non-racial country, and I want to have a country that kind of has a free market. But actually, for me personally, and obviously at the end of the day, I say that Referendum Party is a single issue party, and I can't speak on behalf of the party, because what we want is to deliver the referendum and start the process. But for me, I don't want an out-and-out free market. I want some form of a let me call it a social free market, if I can use the DA's term, in terms of I don't think a pure free market will resolve all of the issues of the Western Cape, which are structural, and will need to have other interventions that will make sure that we start to put the Western Cape on a track that genuinely creates a prosperous future for all. And I think we've seen that, in many other countries when they've gone down this road, and it's not the only example by any means, but I mean, Singapore is a good example of countries that had to tackle with many of the issues that the Western Cape is going, and actually, some degree of government intervention is necessary, albeit that I favour leaning towards the free market wherever that's possible, and I think you would work to a freer and freer markets over time.
At the end of the day,
sorry, go for it.
Sorry, Ryan. All right. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what interventions at a state level happens. It's who implements them and who's responsible for it. Singapore won't exist if it was a democracy. Yeah, it's a democracy, people vote, but come on, let's be honest. It's as democratic as North Korea. The difference between Singapore and North Korea is the quality of the people running those particular countries.
Sure.
So I'm not too sure why the Western Cape, there's this belief that the referendum can be democratic, of course, but the assumption that the Western Cape will be free, open, productive, a great future because it will remain democratic just seems like a lost cause for me. Just make Jordan Hill-Lewis dictator for the next 40 years. I'm not even joking.
Maybe not, but in the real world, that obviously isn't going to happen.
Than having an election every 5 years. I think it's ridiculous. Democracy hasn't worked. We need strong people who are not corrupt, who care about where they are, to deal with issues and solve them. And that needs strength, which is the opposite of democracy.
Well, look, I mean, that's a slightly philosophical debate. I'm a Democrat and I want a democracy, and I recognise that it's not a perfect system. But if we look around the world at the countries that have the highest standards of living, let's work on the HDI index. They're all, with possibly the exception of Hong Kong, they are all really vibrant democracies. So I'm not convinced by the argument that we need a dictatorship. I think there can be.
So let me put it like this. I start to struggle with a lot of politicians in general, whether this be on this side of the pond or the other side of the pond. And the reason for that is like, okay, so you said to me that there's an ideological difference between the Western Cape and the rest of South Africa. If we were to summarize that ideology, even for our own audience, the ideology would be the difference between, as you said, free market capitalism and obviously Marxist-Leninism, ideas of central control. The biggest problem with central control, especially when you come through to any form of Marxist-Leninist ideas, is that the people who are centrally in control are incompetent, useless, and moronic. So it's kind of like you saying to them, I'm going to give the central command some people some responsibility, but these guys you wouldn't trust them to tie your shoelaces, right? And somehow now they're obviously in charge of everything else. And obviously the consequences of getting a toddler to run around with a 9mm is obvious for all. We can see it as we go along. But here's the distinction or the problem that I start to have. Okay, so if we say, right, from an ideological position, what kind of ideology do you want to see? Let's say you wanted an American type ideology. Well, then cool. That means that you have to adopt a type of Hobbesian type of idea. So you have to have your own little love letter to John Hobbes, where you have to say things like, well, actually, you do need to have your own rights to bear arms, because if you have a tyrannical government or a government that doesn't fulfill the will of the people must have the ability to overthrow the government. Australia doesn't believe in that. Australia is still today a country governed by jailers, and the people in it are still prisoners of the jailers. So the problem inevitably becomes, if you look at that, well, how do you assert any form of jail authority? Well, you have central command. Okay, so we're back to where we were in South Africa anyway with the ANC, right? We still have this idea of central command, and you said it yourself. So if I then say to you, right, okay, what type of economy do we want? You said free market capitalism, but not 100% free market, because there's structural issues, which means that basically, so what are we doing? Are we having Thomas Sowell, or are we having Adam Smith? And the answer is, well, we're going to have a hybrid with that, with a little bit of state control. Okay, we're back where we are with the ANC, because the ANC, if you ask them and you say, well, where are we? The ANC will say, well, we have a mixed economy, right? And the mixed economy in the ANC sense just doesn't make sense. In which case, I have to kind of look at all of this and say, well, actually, we're exactly where Rahman just said. And I don't know if you picked up on it. And that says, Rahman said, why is this distinction in the Western Cape, that the Western Cape can do exactly what the ANC does, but it's okay because they can do it better, and we'll get a better result because they're the Western Cape. They're not like the rest of South Africa. And that answer doesn't get made to us. Now, we've seen that even in terms of Alan Winde. Yes, I understand the criticism. We've interviewed Alan Winde and we've called him out on some of the topics ourselves. But Alan Winde, and we've asked the question even around lockdowns, Alan Winde was more stricter in terms of what he wanted the lockdowns to achieve than Cyril Ramaphosa. That's a fact. We can go back in line and we can scrub it in the brush and we can go, oh, no, it wasn't that bad. It was that bad. Let us not forget, this is a guy who wanted compulsory vaccinations. right? Even Cyril Ramaphosa was a little bit like, eee, right? Because this is what we see out of the DA. The DA gets things done, but that does also mean that where the DA wants to adopt stupid policies, they get them done better than the rest of the country. So the question I would have to you is, what do you put in place that stops that from occurring? How do we stop the Western Cape becoming like the rest of South Africa by adopting policies that are drastically different from the ANC? And no one's made that case yet.
Well, I think, look, because I think you're trying to deal in absolutes and ideological theory, and that's not how these things play out. That's not how real politics works. So actually, you kind of have to come back to a step, and let's not forget about which economists we're going to follow, or which. That's not how it works. Here we are in the Western Cape. So let's strip it right back to the other end. That you've got people in the Western Cape who, for 30 years, have been voting for a government that they didn't get and being governed by the government that they rejected. So first of all, they don't have democracy. We're not governed by the people that we voted for. And then the people that we didn't vote for but that do govern us are grossly incompetent, and as a consequence, our standard of living is falling. We've got chronic unemployment, we've got this terrible crime, we've got taxpayers fleeing the country, we've got a decline of services, albeit that our decline is less rapid as in the rest of the country. So we're in this situation that we just need to get out of. And actually, we're only in that situation, or not only, because things aren't simplistic, they aren't black and white. We're in this situation primarily because we don't get the government that we voted for. So the first step is to say, well, look, hang on a second. The first step in fixing this system is to make sure that we get the government that we voted for. And then we start to move forward. Now there's no guarantee in Cape independence. That's not how it works, And actually, if we've seen these economic theories. Every time somebody comes with some perfect economic theory that's going to save the world, it always turns out to be an absolute disaster. I guess sort of China probably is communism will be the perfect example of this utopian system that turned out to be an utter catastrophe. So that isn't how these things play. The first thing we do is take the first step and we get control of our own destiny. And then we have to just trust in the system. And we're not going to have all of the answers worked out. You can't ever have all of the answers worked out. We're not living in a sterile environment where we can change one thing at a time. It doesn't work that way. We actually have to deal with the political realities on the ground. And the first step is that all of the indications say, and there is no guarantee, I accept that, but all of the indications say that if the Western Cape is in control of its own destiny, it will do fundamentally better. It's made better political choices. It's already better governed. Perhaps it's not governed the way that you'd like to see it governed, but actually it's governed in a way that's relatively functional. Do I agree with Alan Winde on some of the decisions that he made? No, I really don't. Would I rather have Alan Winde than Cyril Ramaphosa? Yes, I would, because actually he's more competent. And I'm not an Alan Winde fan at all. But actually, I think we have to be fair and not sort of get wrapped up in sensationalism and just postulate over things that are never really going to happen. We have to deal with the political realities that are there and deal with what's actually possible and practical.
All of that I accept, and I suppose that this is where it becomes difficult in some respects, because we started off this conversation by saying the Western Cape has an ideological difference between the rest of South Africa. And as we've just discussed, it's like, okay, but when we actually start getting into that ideology, this is where the Western Cape as a whole, not just the Reform Party, this is where the Western Cape actually starts to fall over. Because it wants to make that assertion, we are fundamentally different, but then they don't actually want to explain how, because they don't want to rock the boat that much. They kind of want to rock the boat, but not that much. So actually, I've got a better question for you, which is something that I think Ramon will probably expand on in a second. Western Cape currently has its own constitution. Why don't you start by amending your constitution to provide all the rights and duties and responsibilities that you want to see embedded in an independent Cape right now?
Well, first and foremost, because we don't have the capacity to amend the Western Cape Constitution. We haven't got a seat in Parliament, and at this point in time, the Western Cape Parliament is not acting in the best interest of the Western Cape people. So actually, why are we not doing that? Let me take you a step back before that, because changing the Constitution is not going to be an easy step. Why don't we produce a bill that claims the right of self-determination for the Western Cape people as a starting point? Well, we did. It's called the Western Cape People's Bill. It's before Parliament now. Actually, interestingly enough, it was submitted for a legal opinion. I understand that opinion came back yesterday. I'm still waiting to see a copy of it. But we have done exactly that. But here comes the issue. What happened? We sat down. We did speak to the DA. We said to them, look, here is a way for us to assert control, and these things that you want, policing, devolution, federalism, you can have these and you can claim them by right. And you can claim them by right by passing this piece of legislation in the Western Cape Parliament with the majority that you already have. And in true DA fashion, at the start, they loved the idea. And actually, as more and more detail got put on the tree, the more and more they got their cold feet, till we got to the end where they wouldn't even table the bill, and the Freedom Front Plus table the bill. And now, obviously, we're fighting to try and get the DA to vote. So that's fine in principle. We actually have done that, exactly that, because the Western Cape People's Bill would give the Western Cape self-determination and the right to effectively govern itself within South Africa, or in any other way, actually, that it chooses. It claims the right for self-determination. The problem is that the DA aren't willing to vote for that bill. And if they did, I mean, that's in their capacity. The DA could vote for that bill, that actually by the election next year, we'd have the right to self-determination, we'd have the right for devolution. If they wanted it, we'd have the right for federalism. So the answer is that we somehow have to put pressure onto the DA government, which is why we formed this referendum party.
In your face, Byron. How about that? So, my question is, demographics is destiny. We know why the Western Cape votes differently, because there are different races there compared to the rest of the country. I don't know why people can't just say this outright. Latest polling data for the NHI, everyone outside the Western Cape who is not white loves the NHI. Because guess what? They don't pay taxes and they don't care how much it costs. If they got free shit from the government, they love it. Easy to understand why people vote the way they do. However, the Western Cape is 50% coloured, right? It's not the Karens in Sea Point who are the majority, or the Afrikaners in the north. It's the colours. Like, what is the buy-in of the coloured people of the Western Cape? Possibly, the real indigenous people of the Western Cape. Or I'm not going to go down, blood and soil type rhetoric 400 years ago, but there is a very unique demographic to the Western Cape. How are you going to make it work?
So look,
do they believe in the referendum?
Okay, so look. First things first, yes, there absolutely is a link, and I agree with you, it's taboo. We have this dishonesty about the link between demographics and voting patterns. South Africans vote along racial lines. That's just a fact, and we can see it. And actually, the DA prosper wherever there are minorities, and they struggle. And of course, there are exceptions. And actually, we've got to understand that this isn't absolute. We're not saying that all white people vote this way, all black people vote that way. What we're saying is that there's a propensity, and there's a correlation, a strong correlation. And I agree with you. It shouldn't be taboo. It is how it is, and unquestionably that's the reason that the Western Cape votes differently, because it has a different population, and we shouldn't be scared of saying that. So I agree with you entirely on that issue. In terms of what support is there for Cape independence amongst the coast population, 75%. That's the wrong number. I'm trying to think what the number is now. But anyway, it's the vast majority of Cape independence supporters are coloured, and when we polled this year for the first time, it gradually saw increase, and for the first time in our last poll this year in August, support amongst the coloured community is higher percentage-wise than even amongst the white community. So the growth in support for Cape independence has predominantly come from the coloured community, and now it's up around, I can't remember the exact number, I should, but it's up around 80%. It's in the high, I think it's a high 70, 77, 78%.
Yeah. So, thank you for answering. But my second question is, these coloured people are not, hardcore free market liberal Democrats. There's a lot of fundamentalists in there. There's a lot of communists in there. There's a lot of the Cape Coloured Congress is basically the EFF for the coloured people, and they want a seat in the Western Cape Parliament. As always, with any group, you can't just say everyone thinks the same, but there are a variety of interests in that coloured community, whether it be religious, ethnic, whatever the case might be. It's not that easy.
But this is actually, it's a very interesting topic because from the day that we got involved in Cape independence, people have leveled this. So first of all, actually, I'm glad you've first of all got the point, Trace, that people, the uninformed talk about coloured people as if somehow this is one homogeneous group, when actually, it's not even remotely one homogeneous group. There are many subcultures there that hold fundamentally different views. But actually, and one of the questions people said, how do we get the coloured vote? As if there's one thing you can do that's going to get it's like, how do you get all white people to vote? Well, there's nothing you can do that will get all coloured people to vote in a different way, because they're individual people, and then they have these subcultures and so on and so forth. But the reality is, and actually we argue about this all the time with people. They sort of talk about the PA, and they talk about the coloured Congress and good. The coloured people vote for the DA. The overwhelming majority of coloured people vote for the DA. And actually, you can see that in the stats. How do we think the DA sits with a 55% majority in a province where 16% of the population is white? It's coloured people who are electing the DA, not white people. So first of all, we need to understand that. And I can tell you, I knew it anyway, but having sat in our focus groups, the most vociferous supporters of the DA were coloured. So that's the reality.
And do you know why?
I would love to know why you think
there's
why.
There's actual statistics on this. Like, there's actual genuine statistics. This isn't morning shot opinion. This has actually been polled and tested and proved.
Colours hate blacks.
And they perceive the DA the idea that when the ANC goes around calling the DA a racist party, according to the data, some kind of little individuals actually like that because they're not that keen on blacks. So they're like, okay, we like the racist party. Yeah. Even though the DA is not actually a racist party, but that propaganda that the ANC is trying to push actually negatively impacts the ANC. They just too stupid to realize it.
No, so let's have two parts here. Am I aware of the racial tensions in the Western Cape? Of course I am. Anybody who is here is do we choose largely to downplay those and not play the race card for political advantage? We choose not to. We're not trying to start off, I think. But I mean, what the interesting thing is, and I've seen the polling myself. Not necessarily the same polling you've seen or not, but I know some of this polling that's been done around the sort of views, particularly of people who've migrated to the Western Cape and their hostility towards the DA. But one of the questions that we've always asked in polling, and it's frightening because it's moving completely in the wrong direction, is we ask people when we poll, which of these two positions most accurately reflects your position? One, South Africa belongs to all races equally, everybody who lives here, or South Africa is African and other races should behave as guests. And actually, the outcome to that poll result is actually staggering. So the answer is that in the Western Cape, according to that polling question, the least racial group are the whites. 88% of whites support non-racialism, closely followed by the coloureds, 80% of whom support non-racialism. And in the last poll, 69% of black people in the Western Cape felt that the Western Cape predominantly belonged to black people, and white and coloured people should behave as guests. And that obviously is a really, really shocking statistic, and one of these big taboos. And often people argue that we had a similar statistic in the previous poll, and many people argued that it just wouldn't be true, and we repeated it, and actually it had got worse. But if we think about that, I'm not going to hold we must hold individuals to account, so maybe I'll take that back. But that's the prevailing narrative. We're living in an African nationalist country where our government is African nationalist. Our government is teaching people to think that way. Our government is African nationalist. Just think of the language that the president, that the ministers use the whole time in how they refer to ethnic minorities.
I think we need to distinguish here. You're using cross terms. You're talking about African nationalism. Our government is not African nationalism. Our government is black nationalism. There is a hard difference between that, because obviously within South Africa, within Africa as a whole, there are different degrees of ethnicity when it comes through to being African and what it actually means to be African. And this is something obviously Julius Malema is frequently putting his foot in his own mouth when he goes abroad and wants to talk about, all his African brothers, and people are like, hey, we're not actually the same as you. Like, you can't say we're all the same. Now, in South Africa, the African National Congress is only nationalistic when it comes through to degrees of black supremacy. And I'm going to say that very specifically, black supremacy, because look at their legislation. Their legislation will talk about black economic empowerment, things that are too white. Why aren't there enough blacks? Okay, and then when you actually call them out on the rhetoric and you say, you realize there are other ethnic groups within the country that aren't actually doing that well. Things like coloureds or Indians, possibly even Chinese. They're like, oh yeah, but they kind of like, they're black anyway. You know, they're black by extension. But that's not actually the way the rhetoric goes. I'm also very reticent to use the words nationalistic, because this is not a nationalistic government. It does not care about the integrity of South Africa. It cares about the integrity of its voting base and whether or not it can loot the coffers of the state. Would you actually call them primarily a nationalist country, a South African first country? Like, fuck no. And if you believe that, then like you're not paying attention. Like this is a country this is a government that is focused primarily on the poor black individual. And if you understand why they focus primarily on the poor black individual, that's because it's the poor black individual that actually votes for them. No one else votes for them. So
yeah, I have to say that. Sorry,
of course, go for it.
No, sorry, I don't finish. Look, I kind of disagree with you to a certain extent, and I think that the government is, it's almost as in you're describing the government as this. The government is this kind of the starting point of the thing, but the government is just a house that's built of bricks, and the people in the government bring the ideology to the government. So actually, so from my point of view, I kind of think African nationalism, black nationalism, effectively for the most part in South Africa, it's the same thing. Maybe not the correct. Perhaps academically they're different, but I think for most people it's the same thing. And the reality is that the many people, I can't say all, but many people in the South African government, many of the ministers actually are deeply racist. They are people who are African supremacists, black supremacists. At the end of the day, they believe that Africa is a country that belongs to them. And if they were asked that question, in all honesty, that we asked in polling, they would believe that other races should behave as guests. And we get that when people want to blame 1652 and Van Riebeeck and all of our problems started here and so on. We know it, and actually. It just rears its head at certain times. So I think the government is African nationalistic, but perhaps not in terms of an entity. Then what's most important to them, actually helping other people of their race, or stealing and helping themselves, is absolutely stealing and helping themselves. But I think if you strip back to what they really believe, we've got a deeply racist government.
But Phil, the thing is, the ideological divide is due to coloureds not liking blacks in the Western Cape. It's not a question of coloureds being liberal and everyone else is a racial nationalist. The coloureds just don't get along with blacks. Like, simple as that. That's why they vote for someone else.
I don't think that's the case. I think if you look at that polling statistic, 80% of coloured people in the Western Cape thinks that South Africa belongs equally to all races.
So I don't. Minority. Of course, they would say that. They're going to say, "Oh, we must rule South Africa." Every minority is going to say that, Phil.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I suppose the reason I also differentiate is the difference between black nationalism and nationalism as a whole. And I know it may seem like semantics, but it's not. Let's use a good example. Okay, so Gaty McKenzie, we know Gaty McKenzie very well of the Patriotic Alliance. Gaty McKenzie will describe himself as a nationalist. He'll describe himself as a South African nationalist. And he's a South African nationalist that's deeply interested in the coloured voice, because he's a coloured. And obviously it's a degree of almost self-preservation. But if you look at the biggest threat to the DA in the Western Cape is the Patriotic Alliance. Gee, I wonder why. Right, so if you tarred him as being nationalistic in the same way that the ANC are nationalistic, he'd like vomit. He'd actually get physically upset because he does not consider the ANC to be a nationalist party. We know Prince Adil of the Petty Nation. Prince Adil considers himself to be a nationalist. Okay, but if you ask him, is he the same way that you would call him nationalist in the same way that the ANC is nationalist? He'd actually get physically upset. So the idea of nationalism in that perspective isn't actually as easy as you would assume. So when it comes through to the ANC, and I have my own ideas on it, but the idea that the ANC is deeply racist, that there is a degree of that, but you also have to understand that the ANC is ultimately a revolutionary party. In order for it to be a revolutionary party, it needs to destroy what was there before. What was there before was the majority of white people owning the economic levers of power. So the ANC needs to destroy that, regardless of how. If it wants to be true revolutionaries in the Marxist-Leninist fashion, and it wants central command, it needs to destroy that. The only way to destroy it is obviously you can't come out and directly say, okay, let's just outlaw white people, because they'd be called out from that on an international point of view. And Ernest Roots has recently did a video on that about all the international conventions that would break. In fact, in many respects, the ANC is breaking those international conventions right now. But the reality is what you do is you put micro laws in place, things that would be classed as racist, but they're not really that racist, And we know the old analogy which the agency loves to adopt, which is obviously that of the boiling frog. So it's kind of like, but a lot of those things do come down to an ideological divide where you may look at it and go, oh, but it's deeply racist. Actually, it's not racist. In many respects, when the ANC tells me that it's actually anti-racist, in some respects, I believe it. I don't think that they're overly like, let's just kill all white people. I don't think that's the case. But they don't want the system that we have, and they want to have a Marxist-Leninist system, and this is the only way for them to achieve it. It's through micro movements. So I think we need to be very, very careful in some respects what we mean about nationalism, because in the process of like using it in a blanket way, you may inadvertently, and I'm not saying you will, this is just a general statement, but you may inadvertently exclude the very people you want to include. People like Gayton. I think you'd probably find Gayton's actually probably closer to your way of thinking than the ANC. So, I think we just need to be a little bit careful of that.
Well, let's sort of pull that sort of back, because I guess that's a long academic discussion we've had now around race, which is interesting, but probably slightly off the thing. And I think, look, what is the Cape Independence Movement? We're civic nationalists. That's what we are. So, and by civic nationalists, we're people who want to build a society based around a shared set of values. And actually those values are broadly non-racialism, a broadly free market system, and democracy. That are effectively the values that the Western Capes want. It's the values that the Western Cape has voted for, and it's the values of the Cape Independence Movement. And we have very, very few policies in the Cape Independence Movement. And I think the challenge in some ways. Actually, it's one that we're dealing with a lot, and it's a thorny one, and it's one that we've started to grapple, and it's sort of singled me out for a huge amount of abuse, is that non-racialism is a two-way street. And I think that's the issue here, that actually we are fervently non-racial, but actually that also means that we're not willing to be the victims of racism either any more than we want to be the perpetrators, and we want to build a society. South Africa is notionally non-racial, but not in practice, and we want the independent Western Cape to be actually non-racial. We build a society where the color of your skin doesn't become a determinant factor, and actually we ultimately build a society where, although we'll have cultural differences, we ultimately are moving in the same direction. We want to build a country where we can all prosper, and race isn't really a factor. We can look past races. It takes time to get there, I accept. But actually, genuine non-racialism is that it's that kind of set of shared values, and I think we can do that. And effectively, the biggest argument for that is, what have we been voting for 30 years? That's the one piece of evidence that people can't take away. You can go look at it. It's written in the statistics. It's there. It's not. There is no debating it. What did people actually vote for? There it is in the records.
So, Phil Craig, that's been 52 minutes. A lot of grilling. Do you feel like a boerewors on a grill on a Sunday?
Yeah, it's all right. It's been it's fine. I never shy away from these things. I think it's turned into an academic a conversation around things, but there's no shame in that anyway. And actually, it's as I've always said, if you put yourself in the firing line, you must be able to take the criticism and so there's nothing that you've said that's been unfair.
There's no criticism on our side. I just think the fundamental nature of your argument is completely wrong. The Western Cape is independent because the colours don't like other races. It's as simple as that. It's not because colours are liberal. But anyway, that's way beside the point. It's more of a demographic argument than an ideological one. I don't think ideology does exist in South Africa. People just follow what people tell them. If you read and if you listen to the interviews of the old EFF members, Floyd Shivambu and the MMC for Security up here in Joburg, they read one book in their life at the age of 23, the Communist Manifesto or Das Kapital, and that's it. They're like, oh no, now I've been enlightened. And their whole life, they just read this one book. These are not people with ideology. They just read one thing and then they build a political party out of it. Most people are like that as well. But nevertheless, how many votes do you need to make a difference next year?
That's the target. That would be the absolute dream number. We're not naive to understand that that's not an extraordinarily challenging target, but that's the number that we believe would guarantee us a referendum. In terms of it would together with working with the Freedom Front Plus, would bring the DA at 48% and would deny them all other opportunities to avoid a referendum on Cape Independence, because effectively they've got one option, which is to form a government with the ACDP. Who won't push them into a referendum on Cape Independence. So that's the number at 48%, and that's what we'd love to get them to. Obviously, there are other waypoints along the way. There's probably 30,000 votes will get somebody into the provincial parliament and multiples thereof. 84,000 votes gets us 2 people in the national parliament. So we'll have to see where we get. But 100,000 is the target, and that's what we really want. And in theory, that we know that there's at least 1 million people in the Western Cape who really strongly support Cape independence. 850,000 really signed up with Cape Exit, so we should be able to get 100,000 votes if people are willing to sort of to stand up for what they want, and that's the challenge. It's no good saying people I want Cape independence and then actually going to vote for the DA who are saying no. And I think probably the biggest challenge is logistical in terms of can we get that message out to those people enough time so we've drilled it into their heads before 2024. And financially that's a huge ask in terms of it costs money to campaign and that will be the biggest obstacle. But I hope that we'll be able to do that, and time remains to be seen if we're successful. But I always back myself on these things. You don't start a party planning not to achieve it, and actually we've been pretty good so far at achieving most of the things that we wanted. So I'm going to back myself on this one too.
Yeah. So obviously I haven't gone out of my way to just give you a hard time, Phil. Obviously you mentioned certain things, and obviously I just wanted to clarify some of it. I just want to kind of put it up front. I'm in support of Cape Independence. And I said this to you last time. I would support Cape Independence even more if you took, Kocha and some of Nelson Mandela Bay with you. Then like I'm on all fronts, mate. But with that being said, I think it's a long battle ahead of you. I think that battle is going to be shrouded in the hearts and minds of individuals, and I think when it comes through to the hearts and minds of individuals, some of the policy framing and what you may have described as the academics is going to need to be better fleshed out. I mean, you know as well as I do. I worked in the UK government when they were fighting a Brexit campaign, so I know very closely how the argument gets made, and I also know how the counter narrative gets formed. And a lot of the counter narrative is based on, as you would describe it, academics, because you don't have an independent Cape yet, just like they didn't have an independent in the UK. So everything is academics. You don't really know what the situation is, and sometimes the smallest soundbite is all it takes to change a person's opinion. So. I wish you the best of luck with the Reform Party. Obviously, we're going to be sitting there watching very closely. No doubt we'll have you on again to talk about the party and the run up to the elections. But for now, there's nothing really else for us to ask, and just for us to say thank you very much for coming on the show.
Likewise, and thank you for having us here. It was a great pleasure, and it's the Referendum Party, just to get you straight on there. The Reform Party's in the UK. You're still thinking of the UK. It should be the Reform Party. What can I say? I mean, you need to reform this bloody country. Anyway, yes, you're 100% correct. Sorry, but slip of tongue, Freudian slip. No Referendum Party.
Just look for RP on the ballot box. It's somewhere around there.
Yeah, rest in peace, South Africa.
Could mean a lot of other things, but in this one, it's the Referendum Party. Thanks for watching, everyone. Any information you want about the Referendum Party is linked down below in the description. And go give Phil hell on Twitter. His Twitter account is linked below as well. Thank you for watching. Bye.